Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Literary Translation Centre for those of you who have just arrived. My name's Daniel Hahn. I'm the Programme Director of the British Centre for Literary Translation, and I'm joined by the person coughing next to me is Maureen Freely, who is a novelist, a journalist, and a translator, and currently the chair of the Translators Association. We're here to talk about becoming a literary translator, the really kind of basics for getting started, but we wanted to avoid sort of making speeches, and we wanted a session which was just going to be a Q&A, which is just going to be led by the things that people who've gathered here want to ask questions about. I'm going to cheat slightly, and I'm going to ask Maureen one question. But then the rest of the half hour we're going to just leave up to you, and we'll just be guided, as I say, by the things you would like to talk about. But I thought it would be useful before we start to ask Maureen if she could, just in the interest of sort of defining the territory, if you like, if Maureen could just describe how you see your job as a literary translator. What is it you do?
Oh, yes, it works. I think that my idea of the job of a literary translator has changed almost daily since I started. I am a writer in general. I'm a novelist and a journalist, and had been doing that kind of work for many years before going into translation. So when I sat down to translate a novel by Orhan Pamuk about 10 years ago, what I really wanted was, in the first instance, to bring that wonderful book to English, to Anglophone readers. And not just the meaning of it, but the mood of it, the voice of it, the music of it. And so I saw it as myself as a novelist as well as a translator. I was trying to get to the heart of the book and live in the heart of the book, and then try to find the right words for it, and of course make it as accurate as I could in the final draft. I also saw it as something that would keep me in my chair at home, so I could see my children more and just have a quiet life. And I was so wrong. My life has never been so interesting, and that's through all these interesting things that I've discovered what a literary translator really does. Before I left my armchair, being a literary translator meant explaining in some detail to the editors what was really going on in the book and why their corrections were often not quite right. So it was
so polite.
They might be here. So it was this conversation about the cultural meanings or the cultural context of the book. Then, of course, there were questions about how to present the book to the literary communities in this country and in the U.S. So that became part of my job as well. So I ended up being an advisor, informal advisor to the publishers, and an informal advisor to the author when he thought he was getting insulted and really wasn't, that kind of thing. Then this author got involved in some political controversies, and then so did I, on account of being a journalist and somebody who campaigns for freedom of expression. So then, as he became more better known, I was working with other groups of literary translators and literary publishers in other languages. We're all working together for the same author. Then at least I got to go to the party in Stockholm when he won the Nobel Prize, so that was good. The absolute best thing that happened through this long adventure was to begin working with the Translators Association and to find out just what an amazing community of translators we have in this country, despite the fact that our publishing industries doesn't seem to be very interested in publishing very much work from other languages. And during the years that I've been involved with the Translators Association, I've seen incredible number of new initiatives start. Most of them are his fault, by the way. So you'll have to ask him about them. They include mentorships, residencies, summer schools, series at literature festivals, and of course at the very center in which you're sitting. That's probably a good time for me to stop chattering.
Thank you very much. That's it. That's all you're getting. You have to ask us questions now. The rule in these scenarios is always, if you don't ask any questions, we will start asking you questions. This is how it works. So we're assuming people will have questions, and there will be a microphone somewhere right at the back. So yes, if you just wait for the microphone just a moment, please.
Could you please share your personal experiences about how you became a literary translator?
Mine is quite straightforward in that I became a translator in the way that until recently almost everyone became a translator, which was sort of by accident. It used to be relatively unusual for someone to decide to be a translator. It used to be very hard to find a place where one could study being a translator. And a lot of people, from me to someone like Anthea Bell, who's one of the kind of one of the greatest translators we have, didn't decide she was going to be a translator. She became one because someone asked her to translate something because she spoke German. And that's sort of what happened with me. I had no intention of being a translator. I had extraordinary thing to want to do. But a friend happened to know that I happened to speak Portuguese and happened to ask me if I would read a book for her, and I read it and I said, "This is wonderful," and she said, "Will you translate it?" She was a publisher, and I said yes. And then I thought, yes? Suddenly the hubris of that yes only kind of dawned on me the next day. I had no idea what I was doing. But it was to do with the fact that I happened to be friends with a publisher and I happened to have this language. And I suppose this is one of the things which we will have to talk about today. It's to do with publishers having a sense of you and your language being a resource for them. She originally approached me not because she wanted me to translate it, but because she had been sent this book by an agent. It was in Portuguese. She didn't read Portuguese, and she needed someone to do it. And I think increasingly now, this is how a lot of people are finding their way into being translators. Now it tends to be much more proactive because there's, I think, a great sense of people wanting to do this job, which is really exciting. But I think a lot of it comes from that sort of way in. You can't, in the first instance, just decide to translate a very successful book for Penguin because you want to. But the kind of getting involved in that process where publishers are aware of you, publishers are aware of the languages you have, publishers are aware that you might be a useful resource for them, because almost all the time publishers are being pitched. I mean, this is what's happening upstairs in the agents center, is publishers are being sold things which they are unable to read. Every conversation in the agent center today, tomorrow, and Wednesday is agents going to publishers saying, "Here is a fantastic Catalan novel. You just have to trust me. It'll cost you £10,000 and you have no idea, and I'll give you a 2-paragraph synopsis." And this is where the fact that I happen to have Portuguese and this person happened to know me because we had a common friend, and that's how I ended up doing it. There is an advantage to the fact that it's, as Maureen said, the Translators Association and just generally the translation community is I think very well networked, and it's relatively small. Partly because, as Maureen said, there's a relatively small number of books being published in translation. But there is an advantage to that, which is it is not that difficult to get yourself into a position where there will only be half a dozen people in that world reading any one language, and it's relatively easy to get yourself in a position where publishers know.
And there's not a huge amount of money in it. I hope somebody's told you that. And that
you should have said at the very beginning. Anyone here who thinks they can leave now.
But because of that, there's a bit of a romance about it, because people who get involved in this kind of work, translating from other languages into English anyway, do so because they love they love literature, and they really, really want to bring the other literature, into this world. And so there's
you
an
have
awful
to
lot
want
of,
to do it, don't you?
But there's also there's a lot of generosity in the translators networks that I have not seen in journalism networks or in, God forbid, poets and novelist networks, where there's a lot of chest beating, yeah? And as far as how, I think you probably could understand from what I said before that I didn't actually set out to become a literary translator, because one didn't when I was starting out. But I can see, looking back, how I inadvertently prepared for this work by having a literature degree to start with, and being passionate about literature before I did that degree and afterwards. And I should say that I was never taught Turkish. I was taught other languages, but I was never taught Turkish, even though I grew up there. And having mastered spoken Turkish, I was homesick. So I just started reading Turkish fiction with a dictionary until I mastered it. That's something crazy to do, but if you have a passion for a literature, if you feel that it's been locked away from the rest of the world and you want to bring it in, you find you can climb that mountain.
Thank you. Yes, yeah.
Could you elaborate a little bit on source text versus target text? I mean, like you say, you do Turkish into English.
Yes. Do
you do other than Portuguese? How do you how much respect to give to the source text as opposed to the target text?
I translate mostly Portuguese and Spanish. I do a bit of French now as well, but mostly Portuguese and Spanish. I could, like everyone in this room, could talk about that subject forever. The target text is the thing. The target text is the thing you're writing. The target text is the thing that people are reading. I think, in a sense, there isn't an answer to that, because I think you sort of know when you're going too far. I think, but the measure of the success of the work is going to be the target text, and it's going to be. I heard this story recently about Gregory Rubasa, a fantastic translator from Spanish and Portuguese, who was translating 100 Years of Solitude some decades ago, and he was asked by someone, so is your Spanish really good enough to translate this book? And he said, that's completely the wrong question. The right question is your English good enough? It's all about that. It's all about the suppleness with which you are able to do this very complicated thing in your language. There is an assumption, of course, that you're going to have a comfort with and a sensitivity to the source text. But the thing which people are going to be reading is the target text. And I think, and not everyone will agree with me on this, but I would like them to be, and I can tell Katie may not agree with me. I can already see someone who's going to argue with me in a moment. But what I would like is people to read my translations in exactly the same way they read things that have been written in English. And I don't want people to treat it as a different kind of artifact. I think practically this is what happens. You go into a bookshop and there is a crime novel written in English and there's a crime novel translated into English from Swedish, just for example, picking a random country. And I don't think people do or should read them differently. So I think there has to be a very strong sense of what you're capable of doing, producing a piece of writing in the target language. This is, of course, not to say that you kind of have a quick glance at the source text and go, yeah, I've vaguely got the gist and I'm now going to write a crime novel. Loosely inspired by this Swedish crime novel. Because you do, of course, have to be a fantastically good reader in the original language. But I think we always say that it's obviously very important to read very widely in the language from which you are translating, because you want to know the literature and you want to know tones and voices and things. But I think it's just as important to be a reader, a very, very wide and brave reader in the language into which you're translating, because I think, in fact, that is the language in which you want to have as well exercised muscles as you can.
And I would say, first of all, that a translation is never final in the way that the original is final. So any decisions that I make are just the ones I make, and somebody else can sit down tomorrow and do something else, and it will be another interpretation. So a little bit more like a pianist, if you like. That said, because of the way that I went into translation, I had never even heard the terms source text and target text, and I found when I heard them finally from my very nice colleagues at the University of Warwick, who just wanted to know what the hell I was doing and have a conversation with me about it, I felt they were I felt like they were almost from a battlefield. I felt that there was this bullet that was being sent from one place to another, and that's never the way that I understood the work I was doing. I think from a very young age, because my parents used to have me, translate. I might have to translate from my father to angry taxi drivers, that kind of thing. And so one had a sense of living in this very, very charged space between two languages, and it was so clearly not the surface meaning, but so many other things that were going on. And my job is to live in that space and try to find words on the page that will convey it in English, the thing that I hear in Turkish, if that makes any sense. Okay.
Thank you. Question back.
Would you please tell how do you communicate with authors when you translate their novels, articles, whatever, and you have some questions and you need advice, and how to build this dialogue correctly and to make it mutually beneficial? Thank you.
Thank you. How do we deal with authors? Firmly. It depends hugely. I mean, Maureen and I will have very different experiences, but I've worked a little bit with a lot of different writers. There aren't lots of people I've worked on several books with, and it varies hugely. I mean, there are some schools of thought in the translation world who believe that the best author is a dead author. There is certainly something to be said for that.
But they can roll in their graves, you know.
Yes, but that's fine. We don't care. I think the sort of. I was very lucky. The first writer I translated, an Angolan writer called José Eduardo Agualusa, who I refer to quite a lot when I talk about the subject, because he was sort of immediately the perfect author in that respect, in that he was A, available and on email, B, very keen to be involved in the process, to read my drafts, etc., and C, had English which was good but not too good. And not just that it wasn't too good, but he knew exactly how good it was. There is always going to be a danger when you're dealing with a writer who either has English as good as yours or who thinks they have English as good as yours. I was very lucky with this first writer because he would read the English version, he would suggest a few things, and if I said, you just have to trust me, that just doesn't sound right. We had the kind of relationship where he was prepared to defer. This is not always the case, and it's partly a matter of luck. I mean, my experience is, on the whole, most people who are being translated into English tend to be quite keen on knowing about the process. They're more likely to understand English, to have some English. They're more likely to value the English translation or the American translation because of the kind of potential it has to go to other markets. So I know a lot of English language writers who have almost no contact with their translators. I know very few non-English language writers who don't have contact with their English translators. But it kind of depends. It depends to some extent on the writer and on your relationship with them, how comfortable you are. There are some people I don't know terribly well, and I will try and avoid bothering them. And there are some people I will send thousands and thousands of tiny, really irritating questions at 4 o'clock in the morning. So it's very variable.
When I started translating Orhan's books, well, he was an old friend anyway, and he asked me to do the translation. And my condition was that we work on it, on the finished translation together. I'd seen poets working together very fruitfully in a very interesting way, and I thought this would be possible, which was, again, crazy of me, but it was a good crazy decision, because the many years of very, very, very long sentence-by-sentence arguments that we had were amongst the most important of my life. You can learn an awful lot through an argument that is the type of argument that ends in laughter every once in a while. You cannot expect that kind of argument to continue forever, but it's definitely worth it. I came to a much, much deeper understanding of what Orhan was trying to do with language. On the other hand, what was I going to say? How am I going to censor myself? I think that if I were going to do it again, start all over again, I would spend more time thinking about what the rules of engagement were, and where one person's responsibility begins and the other one finishes. Another thing which is kind of related is there are an awful lot of authors like Orhan who are only getting the full editing job, as we understand it, when they go into a language like English. And so there's an awful lot of changes that happen in the English version for the first time, and that is a very difficult discussion as well, but with opportunities. So with the first novel that we worked on together, Snow, as we were going through the English version, he noticed that his hero was going into a telash a lot of the time, which means a panic. And he decided that he didn't want his hero to be going into a panic so often for the English-speaking reader because it was humiliating. So we decided that to cut down the number of panics he went into. And we were all very happy with that decision, and that was a good laugh.
Yeah.
Hi, for the aspiring literary translators, what is your recommendation? Should we pick the book that we would like to be translated and approach publishers, or should we start by getting a degree from a university? What is the training? In what way can we train ourselves, in a way?
You don't want?
I don't mind.
You want me? Okay. I think that now, because there are courses, it's very good to consider a course, and not only will you get practice with translation while you're on the course, you will begin to form the networks that will be your community for the rest of your life. I also think steeping yourself in a literature course can be a very, very good and important thing. And in this country, at Warwick, for example, where I teach, there's more and more interest in doing what we call them hybrid programs and hybrid modules, in which where there is a writing component as well as a literature component. I would really, literary translation is it's a work of humility, and it's a work that requires a lot of precision. But I would advise you to think of yourselves as writers who translate, and then you will immediately understand this larger project. The project of bringing an ignored literature into English, both past and present, is a wonderful project. And if you have that idea, then it's clear that studying literature is an important part of it. It's clear that a practical bit should be part of it, and it's clear that you want to be taking your passion to publishers. And rather than decide whether you should begin this way or that, you begin all ways at once and see what works. Generally, you want to be, Orhan's first book got into English simply because a rather intrepid person, not a translator, called Victoria Holbrook, went to Turkey, learned Turkish, read the book, loved the book, took it to Karkanet. And so that sort of thing is possible and very important. But there was a bit of luck involved. So you could be doing that sort of thing, discovering the new authors, but also doing favors for these editors who have books that they need help with. Is this a good book? Is this a book that you can translate, and so on? So being in the networks and being aware of everything that's going on, and enjoying absolutely everything you do, which is my great privilege, and it can be yours as well.
And these things do also feed into each other, because if you find the book you really want to translate and you take it to a handful of publishers, even if they don't bite, what they will do is they'll get a sense of who you are, they'll get a sense of what you like, they'll get a sense of how good you are if you've done a sample translation. So I think even if you're not going to get your absolutely favorite translation job first of all, it's a very good way of what you need is for publishers to know who you are and what sort of tastes you have, and to think about you as a possible person for reports or for translations. At the first session this morning, Philip Gwyn-Jones, who's the executive publisher at Granta and Portobello, was talking about a number of different publications that promote literature to publishers, and he said that he was struck by the ones where you could sense the passion. Some of them are kind of more are sort of cooler, but he said you could tell the ones which had the sort of passion behind them, and that's the kind of thing they're going to remember. So they may not buy this absolutely one favorite book of yours, but they may later see something a bit like it and think, who might like this.
But when I worked for many years as a freelance journalist, it was the same sort of thing. There were things that I became very interested in, would research, would really want to place articles on, and whenever I was really interested in it, it was a general rule that nobody else was, and so you'd have to bide your time and hold on to those things and do a lot of other work, and then when the moment is right, you can bring it forward again and again, and most of the time you don't get anywhere, but then there's the one time that you do. Remember the Oscars. There isn't a movie that has ever won in which somebody's saying, thank you for fighting for this project for years and years. Same thing.
Another question.
We've worn them out.
Yes, on the aisle.
What's the best advice that you can give a translator about making themselves more visible to publishers and editors?
You're at the London Book Fair. That's good. This is a good sign. Anyone who can hear me at this moment, I'm assuming we're not being live streamed anywhere, so anyone who is here has done the most important thing. One thing which is probably worth thinking about is not just kind of in a blanket way, sending your CV to every publisher you can find in the Writers and Artists Yearbook, but thinking about networks which are specific to the language or languages you work from. There are a lot of, this isn't true for every language or every country, but there are a lot of cultural institutes, for example, which have relatively tight and relatively well-connected networks of people who are particularly interested in promoting Polish books, promoting Catalan books, promoting Norwegian books, whatever it may be. And those, it's very easy to get into those networks, to meet those people, and it's very easy then to be, it's a slightly strange word, but to be kind of accepted into those groups and to find yourself a part of those conversations. So apart from, of course you have to be at the book fair and you have to just be shameless and introduce yourself to people, and it's agonizing, and I can't do that. Just introduce yourself to publishers, and it's a ghastly thought. But there are ways of kind of not exactly short-circuiting that, but there are ways of making that slightly easier by thinking about very specific networks to do with the language you work from. Talk to the experienced translators in the languages you work from, who absolutely will help, and will tell you who's worth being in touch with.
But there's also a question of the mindset. I convene the MA in writing at Warwick, and so talking in general about how to break into publishing. My students will generally arrive with this idea in their heads that there's this big building full of important people who never look out the window, and they're going to have to somehow kick the door open, somehow get inside, that there's an inside. And so what we model at Warwick is this idea that we're all inside already, and it's what we do together. And so what I encourage them to do is to think of good ideas that are helpful to the people who are already in the industry, who are struggling, because we're all at a disadvantage if we're interested in literature and translation. What could you do, you and your friends, because collaborative work is really excellent. Just think of good ideas that would be helpful, and then do them. And then you're working with people, and you're not the supplicant anymore, and you're in the network.
We just about time for one more question, I think.
Before you're thinking about that, I'm just so glad I'm not going to have to follow my own advice.
Sounds so easy, doesn't it?
Anything else? Yeah.
I was wondering, how long time do you need to translate a book?
Ooh. Okay. Never always longer than I think.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, when you're signing the agreement,
Yeah.
Well,
you talk about it, and
but it also depends on how many other things you have going on, and considering the amount of money in these contracts, you always do have other things going on. I would say that if you said that the average number of words that you translate in a day, including correcting, of course, you'll go back and correct many times later. You need time for all those later drafts, but the first draft, how many words will you do a day in a full day?
Well, I slightly hesitate to answer this question because what I'm going to say is probably quite misleading. I will very comfortably do 5,000 or 6,000 words a day, but those are 5,000 or 6,000 words which are a very, very rough, pretty much unreadable draft. And it's quite hard to gauge how much time I actually spend translating because, like Maureen said, you're usually doing several things at the same time. And you may spend 5 months on a book, but it's only taking you 5 months because you're doing 11 things at the same time. Obviously, it's important to have a fairly frank conversation with the publisher when you're signing your contract, so that if it's going to take you a long time, you know that you're not committed to do something you're uncomfortable with. Having said which, my experience, and this probably just tells you more about me than about the job, is I will keep working until the night of the deadline regardless. And there is an element which I think is true about any kind of translation, which is you could keep doing it and there comes a point at which you don't finish, you just sort of stop. And you then play with it a little bit at proof stage, and then you play with it a little bit at the end, and then you regret all the things you didn't do when it's actually published. So no, it can kind of occupy as much space as you give it, but I think you have to be fairly realistic when you're committing to a deadline that.
But I think that deadlines do concentrate the mind, and I think you can get very, very slow with translation because it's such hard work. I would say in the beginning of a novel, it's very slow for me because I'm trying to get the voice and the style, and so you want to get that right. And so
does there then come a point at which you just kind of catch fire?
Then the deadline looms, and there's angry phone calls and so on and so forth. So I can get up.
You stop caring about the voice after a while. It's fine.
I mean, people say, our friends say that 2,000 words a day is a good thing. I don't often have that luxury, and I often up to the 5,000 word length, which I find unbearable. It should be against the neurological law to do something, at least from a non-Western language into English. But I can do it, and then I'll need to put it away for some time so that it goes cold, and I can look at it, go back to the Turkish, and also go back to the English and find the solution.
Thank you very much. That is our half hour, I'm afraid. There is going to be another session exactly like this and also that. No, Maureen is going to be here again tomorrow at 5:15 for another half-hour session with Rod Schwartz, who's the chair of the Writers and Translation Committee of English Pen. We'll be doing another sort of Q&A a bit like this. So if you had questions you didn't get answered, come back tomorrow. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen.